Welcome to the Haunting Horror channel. Please subscribe, like this video, give this video a like and write a comment. Thank you and enjoy watching. The city was a maze of towering glass and steel, a far cry from the rolling green hills where I spent my childhood. Skyscrapers scraped the clouds, their mirrored surfaces reflecting the relentless hum of traffic and the ceaseless pulse of neon signs. I used to crave wide-open spaces, the kind where the horizon met the sky in a comforting embrace. Now, trapped in this concrete jungle, my eyes strained against the dizzying heights, a tightness constricting my chest. It wasn't always this way. I used to scale trees with the reckless abandon of youth, the wind whispering secrets through the leaves as I reached for the sun. But somewhere between the dirt roads and the bustling avenues, a fear had taken root, a fear that turned exhilarating climbs into potential plunges, the thrill of heights replaced by a suffocating sense of vulnerability. Tonight, the city's oppressive energy felt heavier than usual. The air hung thick with a pre-storm humidity, and the flickering street lamps cast grotesque shadows that danced at the edge of my vision. I clutched my worn leather satchel closer, the familiar way to small comfort in the urban wilderness. "Hey, miss!" A voice, rough and gravelly, sliced through the cacophony of the city. I froze, the hairs on my arms prickling. A figure detached itself from the shadows, emerging into the pool of dim light cast by a dying street lamp. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the hood of a worn sweatshirt. My breath hitched in my throat. "Can you spare some change?" he continued, his voice a low rumble. My hand instinctively reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the worn smoothness of a few crumpled bills. "Actually," I started, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face, "I don't have any cash on me." The smile didn't reach his eyes. They glinted with a predatory hunger that sent a jolt of fear through me. "Maybe you got something else then." His voice was a shade softer now, but the menace was unmistakable. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo drowning out the city's noise. I took a hesitant step back, my gaze darting around the deserted street. There was nowhere to run. "Look," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't have anything valuable, just my work stuff." He lunged forward, surprisingly fast for his size. I yelped, stumbling backward. My foot caught on a crack in the sidewalk, sending me pinwheeling through the air. A scream tore from my throat, cut short by the bone-jarring impact of concrete. The world went white for a moment, then dissolved into a kaleidoscope of blurry lights and distorted sounds. The city noises seemed muffled, as if filtered through a thick layer of cotton. I lay there, sprawled on the cold surface, a sickeningly sweet metallic tang filling my nostrils. Struggling to breathe, I tried to move, but my body felt heavy and unresponsive. Panic clawed at the edges of my consciousness. Where was the pain? Shouldn't I be screaming? My gaze fell to my chest, drawn by a dark stain spreading across my shirt. A jagged piece of metal protruded from the fabric, glinting under the flickering street lamp. A horrifying realization dawned on me. I couldn't feel a thing. No searing pain, no ragged gasps for breath, just a chilling emptiness. With a trembling hand, I reached for the knife, the metal cold and unyielding against my skin. I pulled, a primal scream building in my chest, but it never escaped my lips. There was no pain, only a dull throbbing in my head. The world tilted at an alarming angle as I tried to roll onto my side. My limbs felt detached, like disconnected marionette strings. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to vomit. Then, a voice, faint, distorted, as if echoing from a great distance. "Help! Someone, please. But the voice wasn't coming from someone else. It was me, or rather, a hollow echo of me, a disembodied plea lost in the cacophony of the city. The memory of my own voice, a disembodied plea echoing in the night, clung to me like a shroud. I tried to scream again, to claw my way out of the suffocating silence, but nothing happened. My body remained a limp shell, unresponsive to the frantic commands of my mind. The cityscape had shifted. No longer were there just towering buildings, but one specific behemoth dominated my field of vision. Its dark glass facade reflected the city lights in a chaotic dance, and at its peak, a red beacon blinked rhythmically, mocking my helplessness. My thoughts were fragmented, a jumbled mess of childhood memories and flashes of the attack. The rolling green hills of my youth seemed like a lifetime ago, a stark contrast to the harsh reality of the concrete jungle that held me captive. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the distance caught my eye. A figure, small and silhouetted against the harsh neon glow of a diner sign, emerged from an alleyway. It shuffled along the sidewalk, its shoulders hunched and head downcast. A flicker of hope sparkled in me. Maybe, just maybe, this person could help. With a Herculean effort, I concentrated, willing myself to move, to shout, to do anything that would attract their attention. But my body remained an inert vessel, a prison constructed from my own flesh and bone. The figure came closer, revealing itself to be an elderly woman with a shopping cart overflowing with plastic bags. Her face was etched with the lines of a hard life, and her eyes held a weary resignation. As she shuffled past, I focused all my mental energy on a single word, pushing it outwards with a desperate intensity. Help! The word formed itself in my mind, clear and concise, but it never left the confines of my skull. Frustration, a raw and primal emotion, flooded through me. Was this it? Was I doomed to lie here, a forgotten shell, forever trapped in this silent scream? The woman continued on her way, the rhythmic clatter of her shopping cart fading into the night. Just as despair threatened to consume me, another figure emerged from the shadows. This one was tall and muscular, clad in a black uniform. A security guard. Hope flared anew. This man, with his radio and authority, surely he wouldn't ignore me. I willed myself to move a finger, to twitch an eyelid, anything to grab his attention. But my body remained an unyielding statue. He approached with a confident stride, his gaze sweeping the street with a practiced eye. His eyes landed on my crumpled form, and for a moment, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Drunk again, lady, he muttered under his breath, a note of disgust in his voice. He nudged my shoulder with his boot, the touch sending a phantom jolt through me. Get yourself together and move along. He continued his patrol, leaving me even more desperate, even more alone. Tears, hot and silent, welled up in my eyes. It was a useless reaction, a pathetic display of emotion in a body devoid of feeling. But even without the physical sensation of crying, the emotional anguish was real. As the security guard disappeared around the corner, another thought, chillingly clear, rose in my mind. If I couldn't feel pain, if I couldn't scream, if I couldn't even attract the attention of a stranger, then had anyone even noticed my fall? Was I already dead? And if not, what fate awaited me in this silent, unmoving body? The city pulsed around me, a symphony of honking horns, screeching brakes, and the distant wail of sirens. Yet I remained trapped in a silent world, a ghost tethered to a broken body. The image of the red blinking beacon atop the skyscraper had become a constant torment, a cruel reminder of my isolation. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the subtle shifts in light and the changing faces of the passers-by. I watched them, a silent observer in a world that seemed to have forgotten me. Some hurried by with determined strides, others shuffled along lost in their own thoughts, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding on the cold sidewalk. One afternoon, a young couple stopped in front of me. The woman, her face a mask of concern, knelt beside my body. Her boyfriend hovered awkwardly behind her, his gaze flitting nervously between me and the approaching crowd. "Are you all right?" the woman asked, her voice gentle. Her question, though meaningless to my deep ears, sparked a desperate flicker of hope within me. Maybe, just maybe, she could somehow sense my plight. I focused on her, pouring all my energy into a single thought. "Help me." The words echoed in my mind, a silent plea trapped in a voiceless scream. "She must be drunk," the boyfriend muttered, his voice laced with impatience. "There's nothing we can do." "We can't just leave her here," the woman insisted. She reached out a hand, hesitantly brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. A warmth, faint and fleeting, bloomed where her hand touched me. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to jolt me awake from the growing despair. Was this a sign? Could she somehow feel a faint echo of my existence? "Call an ambulance," the woman said, her voice rising above the din of the city. "She needs help." The boyfriend hesitated, then finally pulled out his phone. Relief washed over me, a bittersweet tide that threatened to drown out the gnawing fear. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe this was my chance to escape this silent prison. As the wail of approaching sirens pierced the urban cacophony, I focused on the woman, the only person who seemed to have acknowledged my invisible presence. In my mind, I formed another desperate plea, a silent thank you for noticing, for caring, for offering me a lifeline in the vast ocean of indifference. The woman met my gaze, a flicker of something akin to understanding passing between us. She squeezed my hand gently, a silent promise hanging in the air. "Don't worry," she seemed to say with her eyes. "Help is coming." Then, the world dissolved into a dizzying blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the woman's face, etched with concern, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Harsh fluorescent lights stabbed at my eyelids, dragging me back from the comforting oblivion of unconsciousness. Disoriented and groggy, I tried to blink, but my eyelids felt heavy, like lead weights stitched onto my face. A dull ache throbbed behind my eyes, a sensation so foreign after days of numb emptiness that it felt almost pleasant. The sterile white walls of a hospital room swam into focus. A low hum emanated from a machine beside my bed, its rhythmic beat the only soundtrack to the sterile silence. Panic clawed at my throat, a strangled, silent scream trapped inside my chest. "Easy there," a soothing voice murmured beside me. A woman in a crisp white coat, her face framed by a halo of short, dark hair, stood by my bedside. "You're safe now. You're at City Central Hospital." Safe. I tried to croak out the word, but my voice emerged as a dry rasp, barely audible even to myself. Was I safe? Trapped in a silent, unmoving shell, I wasn't so sure. The doctor, her name tag reading Dr. Reyes, gave me a gentle smile. "You were lucky," she said, her voice calm and professional. "A young couple found you on the street and called for help. You have a collapsed lung and a serious injury, but you're going to be all right." Lucky. I wanted to scream, to rage at the injustice of it all. Was this lucky? To be alive but unable to speak, to move, to even feel the pain of my injury. Dr. Reyes continued, oblivious to the turmoil brewing within me. "We've run some tests," she explained, consulting a chart at the foot of the bed. "There seems to be some nerve damage, which explains why you can't feel anything. We're still trying to determine the cause. Nerve damage. The explanation did little to alleviate my fear. Was this temporary? Permanent? Would I be forever trapped in this silent prison? Dr. Reyes noticed the flicker of terror in my eyes. "We'll do everything we can to help you recover," she assured me, her voice laced with genuine empathy. "But for now, you need to rest." She patted my hand, a fleeting touch that sent a phantom jolt through my numb body. As she moved away, a young woman with worried eyes peeked through the doorway. It was the woman from the street, the one who had noticed me when others hadn't. "Can I see her?" she asked Dr. Reyes, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Reyes nodded. "Just for a few minutes." The woman entered the room, her gaze landing on me. Her eyes well up with tears, and she reached out a hand, hovering hesitantly above mine. "I'm Sarah," she said softly. "I'm the one who found you." Seeing her, the memory of my silent plea, the desperate hope I had focused on her, flooded back. Tears, hot and silent, pricked at my own eyes. Though I couldn't speak a word of thanks, a surge of gratitude washed over me. Sarah, with her simple act of kindness, had become my lifeline, a connection to the world I felt so desperately adrift from. As she sat by my bedside, her silent presence a comfort in the stark white room, a sliver of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, even in this silent world, I wouldn't be alone. Days blurred into weeks, the sterile walls of the hospital room becoming my new reality. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a quiet determination to understand and, if possible, overcome my condition. Dr. Reyes visited daily, her face etched with a mixture of concern and professional detachment. "The tests are inconclusive," she announced one afternoon, her voice laced with frustration. "The nerve damage is extensive, but the cause remains unclear. It could be the fall or—" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the bandages wrapped around my chest. "Or the knife." I finished the sentence in my head, a cold dread settling in my stomach. The memory of the mugging, the glint of metal, was still vivid, a horrifying counterpoint to the sterile white of the room. "We're exploring all possibilities," Dr. Reyes continued, her voice firm. "There might be specialists we can consult, new treatments we can try." Her words offered a glimmer of hope, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. Specialists, treatments, they all sounded expensive, out of reach for someone without a job or insurance. The fear of being discharged, of being left to navigate this new reality alone, was a constant companion. One afternoon, Sarah arrived, her usual sunny disposition clouded with worry. "I spoke to my uncle," she announced, her voice hesitant. "He's a lawyer, and he specializes in, well, difficult cases." Difficult cases. I echoed in my mind, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Was she admitting the severity of my situation, the uphill battle I faced? "He thinks he might be able to help," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "He deals with insurance companies, fights for people who can't fight for themselves." A flicker of warmth blossomed in my chest. Sarah, the stranger who had noticed me when others hadn't, was now fighting for me, refusing to let the system bury me alive. It was a small gesture, but in this world of silence and paralysis, it felt monumental. "He wants to meet you," Sarah added, her gaze searching mine. "Can I tell him it's okay?" Even without a voice, the answer was clear. Sarah's act of kindness had rekindled a spark of hope within me. Maybe with her help, with the help of a good lawyer, I wouldn't be alone in this fight. It was time to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and maybe, just maybe, claw my way back from this abyss. Yes, I willed the word in my head, focusing on her with all my might. "Tell him yes. The word hung unspoken, a silent plea that landed with a soft thud in the sterile room. But in the shared look between Sarah and me, a silent understanding bloomed. We were in this together, and the fight for my future, for a life beyond the silence, had just begun. Sarah ushered in a man with a sharp gaze and a confident stride. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, Sarah's uncle, and his presence filled the sterile room with an unexpected energy. He pulled up a chair beside my bed, his eyes taking in the stark surroundings, the tangle of wires snaking across my chest, before settling on mine. "Sarah tells me you've been through a rough patch," Mr. Thompson said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a formidable-looking man. "She also tells me you don't give up easily." I wanted to nod, to offer some gesture of agreement, but my body remained a frustratingly unresponsive vessel. Stuck in this silent scream, I could only project my thoughts outward, hoping this stranger with kind eyes could decipher their urgency. Mr. Thompson seemed to sense my frustration. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll find a way to communicate. For now, just listen." He launched into a detailed explanation of my situation, his words painting a bleak but realistic picture. The fall, the knife wound, the extensive nerve damage, an invisible prison with no clear escape route. But then his tone shifted. He spoke of medical specialists, cutting-edge therapies, and the fight against uncooperative insurance companies. "It'll be a battle, but we'll fight it together," he declared, his gaze meeting mine with unwavering determination. "Sarah wouldn't let me rest until I met you, and seeing you in here, well, let's just say it reignited a fire in my old bones." A spark of gratitude flickered within me. This man, a complete stranger, was taking on my fight as his own. It was overwhelming, humbling, and strangely comforting. "So," Mr. Thompson continued, leaning closer, "how do you want to handle communication? We can try letterboards, blinking lights, even eye movements if necessary." His words sparked a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way to break free from this silent cage, to finally express the thoughts and emotions swirling inside me. I focused all my energy on blinking, a slow, deliberate sequence that spelled out a single word. Talk. The effort left me exhausted, but the single word hung heavy in the air. Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with surprise. Mr. Thompson's lips curved into a smile, a hint of pride flickering in his eyes. "Talk, huh?" he repeated, his voice warm. "That's a damn good start." In that moment, staring back at the lawyer with kind eyes and the woman who had become my lifeline, a fragile sense of hope blossomed. This battle for my future had just begun, and while the path ahead was uncertain, I wouldn't be facing it alone. With a silent talk echoing in the room, a new chapter had begun, a chapter of resilience, of fighting back, and maybe, just maybe, reclaiming a voice in the deafening silence. Days turned into weeks, the sterile walls of the hospital becoming a battleground. Mr. Thompson, true to his word, had become a fierce advocate. He wrangled reluctant insurance companies, spoke to specialists in hushed tones, and brought a whirlwind of activity into my otherwise monotonous world. Dr. Reyes, once reserved, seemed to warm to the change. With Mr. Thompson's tenacity and Sarah's unwavering support, even she seemed to share a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, a young woman with an air of quiet confidence entered the room. Dr. Reyes introduced her as Dr. Patel, a specialist in neurological rehabilitation. Dr. Patel, unlike her colleagues, didn't focus solely on the medical charts. She sat by my bedside, her gaze meeting mine with an intensity that felt almost invasive. "They tell me you want to talk," she said, her voice soft yet firm. I blinked once, the pre-arranged signal for yes. Dr. Patel smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "All right," she continued, her voice filled with a quiet excitement. "Let's try something new." She pulled out a device that looked like a small keyboard with brightly lit squares. Each square contained a letter, symbol, or picture. Dr. Patel pointed to a square with a picture of a house. "House," she said clearly. "If this is what you want to say, blink once." I stared at the picture, the image sparking a faint memory of my childhood home. It was a long shot, but I focused and blinked once. Dr. Patel's smile widened. "Excellent. Now, how about this one?" She pointed to a square with an angry red face. I hesitated. The frustration, the fear, the overwhelming silence, those emotions were easy to identify. With a slow blink, I acknowledged the angry face. Dr. Patel continued, slowly building a string of words and images. It was a laborious process, frustratingly slow, but with each successful communication, a spark of hope ignited within me. This wasn't a complete voice, but it was a start, a way to bridge the gap between my trapped thoughts and the outside world. Finally, after a series of blinks and pointed squares, a sentence emerged on the small screen attached to the device. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The words, stark and simple, carried the weight of weeks of silent struggle. A tear escaped my dry eye, tracing a slow path down my cheek. Dr. Patel, Sarah, and even the ever-stoic Dr. Reyes exchanged surprised looks. "There you go," Dr. Patel said, her voice soft. "You did it." In that moment, more than just a sentence was formed. A silent barrier crumbled, a connection forged. It was a small victory, a single step on a long and arduous journey, but it was a victory nonetheless. And for the first time since the fall, the silence in the room didn't feel deafening. It felt pregnant with possibility. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of tests, consultations, and frustratingly slow progress. The communication device, dubbed the Grid by Dr. Patel, became my lifeline. It allowed me to express basic needs, answer questions, and slowly, painfully, piece together what happened that fateful night. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson entered the room, his usual confident stride replaced by a somber air. Sarah, ever by my side, mirrored his glum expression. "We got the results from the police investigation," Mr. Thompson said, his voice low. "They found the weapon, but they haven't identified a suspect." Frustration bubbled within me. No name, no face, just a chilling reminder of the violence that had shattered my life. I used the Grid, painstakingly spelling out clues. "Witness." Mr. Thompson sighed, his eyes filled with empathy. "There were no real witnesses," he admitted. "The security guard you mentioned." He hesitated. "Well, he claims he didn't see anything suspicious." A surge of anger, hot and unexpected, lanced through me. Disbelief mingled with the frustration. How could he have ignored me? A helpless figure sprawled on the sidewalk. I tapped out on the Grid. "Look again. Security guard." Mr. Thompson studied the message, his face grim. "We'll look into it again," he promised, his voice heavy. "But you have to understand, eyewitness testimony can be unreliable." Unreliable. I wanted to scream. It was the only person who had even acknowledged my presence. But my frustration remained trapped in the confines of the Grid, a silent scream on a tiny screen. Sarah reached out, her gentle touch a soothing balm on my growing agitation. "We'll find something," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet determination that mirrored Mr. Thompson's. "We won't give up." Her words, coupled with Mr. Thompson's renewed resolve, offered a flicker of hope. Maybe the security guard was mistaken. Maybe there was another angle they hadn't considered. But even as a flicker of optimism sparked within me, another, darker thought crept in. What if there was no one, no witness, no shred of evidence? Was I doomed to remain not only voiceless, but also forgotten, a ghost in a body? The silence in the room, once pregnant with possibility, now thrummed with a new tension. The fight for my future, for justice, had taken a sharp turn, and the path ahead seemed more uncertain than ever. Weeks blurred into months, the hospital room transforming into a monotonous battleground. Therapy sessions with Dr. Patel brought some progress. With the grid, I could communicate basic needs and even engage in rudimentary conversations. However, the lack of answers regarding my attack gnawed at me. One afternoon, Sarah brought a familiar face into the room. It was the young woman who had found me, the one I knew only as "help me" from the silent plea I had focused on her that night. "Hey," she said shyly, her cheeks flushing pink. "I brought someone who might be able to help." Standing behind her was a man in a rumpled trench coat, his face weathered and his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies, a private investigator Sarah had hired using the settlement from a minor car accident she'd been in. Mr. Davies surveyed the room with a practiced eye, his gaze finally settling on me. "So, you're the one they call the Grid," he said, his voice gruff, but oddly comforting. I blinked once, the pre-arranged signal for yes. A flicker of understanding crossed Mr. Davies' face. "All right then," he continued, pulling out a notepad and pen. "Let's see what we can dig up. Tell me everything you remember about that night." Everything. My memories of the attack were fragmented, flashes of fear and confusion. But with the Grid, I could communicate specific details. The darkness of the alleyway, the metallic glint of the knife, the chilling emptiness of my body following the fall. Mr. Davies listened intently, jotting down notes with a rapid scratch of the pen. When I finished, he tapped his pen against his chin, his brow furrowed in thought. "Not much to go on," he admitted, his voice devoid of sugarcoating. "But let's start with that security guard. Sarah tells me he claims he didn't see anything, and used the Grid to angrily tap out. Liar! Ignored me." Mr. Davies chuckled, a dry rasp that surprised me. All right, he said, holding up a hand. "Let's not jump to conclusions. People see what they want to see, especially when they're looking the other way." He leaned closer, his voice conspiratorial. "I have a friend who works with security footage. We can see if your friendly neighborhood guard was as diligent as he claims." A sliver of hope pierced through the thick layer of frustration. Maybe Sarah's impulsive decision to hire a private investigator wouldn't be a waste after all. Maybe, just maybe, Mr. Davies, with his rumpled coat and sharp eyes, could see the truth where others had turned a blind eye. "Good," I typed on the Grid, the frustration momentarily pushed aside by a spark of anticipation. "Find truth." Mr. Davies grinned, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "That's what I do best, kid. Now tell me more about that red beacon." As he delved deeper into the details of the night, the sterile room buzzed with newfound energy. The weight of unanswered questions felt lighter, replaced by the possibility of uncovering the truth. It was a long shot, a gamble, but in the face of silence, even a sliver of hope felt like a victory. The fight for my future, for justice, was entering a new chapter, one shrouded in shadows and fueled by a relentless pursuit of the truth. Days turned into weeks, punctuated by Mr. Davies' sporadic visits. He'd arrive with a rumpled coat and a glint of news in his sharp eyes, each update delivered in his gruff yet oddly comforting voice. But the news wasn't always good. The security guard, it turned out, had a suspiciously convenient blind spot in his camera coverage. The alleyway, shrouded in perpetual darkness, yielded no witnesses. Frustration gnawed at me. My memories, pieced together through the grid, remained fragmented, a frustrating dance of fear and confusion. The lack of progress felt like a suffocating fog, obscuring the truth I desperately craved. One afternoon, Sarah arrived, her usually bright eyes clouded with worry. "Mr. Davies isn't coming today," she announced, her voice hushed. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. "Why not?" I tapped out on the grid, the question forming a stark sentence on the small screen. Sarah hesitated, casting a nervous glance towards the door. He might be in a little bit of trouble," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Trouble? My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone found out about his digging? Was he in danger? With the grid, I typed out a frantic question. "Why? Is he hurt?" Sarah reached out, her touch warm and reassuring. "He's okay," she soothed, "but the police are asking questions. They don't like people poking their noses into their business." Disbelief bubbled within me. The police, who hadn't bothered to investigate my case properly, were harassing someone who was actually trying to find the truth. I typed out a message, filled with anger and frustration. "Police ignore me. Now threaten him." Sarah bit her lip, her face etched with concern. "It's frustrating, I know," she said helplessly. "But Mr. Davies wouldn't give up. He said to tell you. Keep fighting." Those words, simple yet powerful, resonated within me. Sarah was right. Giving up wasn't an option. Mr. Davies, a stranger who saw me when others looked away, had become an unexpected ally. And even if the police were trying to silence him, it only fueled my own resolve. Then keep fighting too, I typed on the grid, a newfound determination coursing through me. Find Davies. Need him. Sarah met my gaze, a flicker of admiration lighting up her eyes. "That's the spirit," she said with a small smile. "We won't let them intimidate us. We'll find Mr. Davies, and we'll find your attacker. Together." The days that followed were a tense waiting game. Sarah kept me updated on the news, the frustration in her voice mirrored by my own. But amidst the worry, a new feeling emerged, a sense of solidarity. I wasn't alone in this fight. Sarah, Dr. Patel, Mr. Thompson, and now Mr. Davies, they were all fighting for me, their unwavering support a beacon of hope in a sea of uncertainty. Then, one afternoon, a familiar figure arrived, his rumpled coat and sharp eyes radiating a cautious optimism. Mr. Davies was back, a mischievous glint in his gaze that hinted at a secret victory. "Seems the police found something else to occupy their time," he announced, a hint of a grin playing on his lips. "Now, let's get back to work, shall we?" The weight of worry lifted from my chest, replaced by a spark of anticipation. Mr. Davies was back, and with him, the hope for uncovering the truth, for finding justice, for finally breaking free from the silence. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, with my allies by my side and a fire rekindled in my heart, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mr. Davies returned, his usual rumpled demeanor replaced by a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. He pulled out a worn manila folder, placing it on the sterile table beside my bed with a dramatic flourish. "All right, kid," he announced, his voice barely a whisper. "Looks like we might have a lead." I used the grid, tapping out a question filled with cautious hope. "What is it?" Mr. Davies leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. "Remember that red beacon you mentioned, the one atop the skyscraper?" My mind raced back to the image, a constant torment during those silent days on the sidewalk. I blinked once, indicating a positive memory. "Well, Mr. Davies continued, a slow smile spreading across his face. Turns out that fancy building has a state-of-the-art security system. And guess what? They keep recordings for a month. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. Could it be? Could there be a recording of the attack? A glimpse of the person who stole my voice and my freedom? I typed on the grid with trembling fingers, recording. See me? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Mr. Davies chuckled, his voice laced with a nervous energy. The building owner's a real stickler for privacy. But let's just say your friend, the lawyer, he glanced at Mr. Thompson, who stood by the window, a knowing smile playing on his lips, might have used his negotiation skills to convince them otherwise. Relief washed over me, warm and welcome. Mr. Thompson, ever the formidable advocate, had used his legal expertise to gain access to the recordings. The path to the truth, though fraught with challenges, was finally opening up. When? I typed, the single word pulsating with urgency. Mr. Davies patted the folder. We're going to need your help for that, kid. He opened the folder, revealing stacks of photographs. Each picture depicted a different angle of the skyscraper, the red beacon a constant, watchful presence. These are security stills from the night you were attacked, Mr. Davies explained, pointing to a specific picture. We need to pinpoint the exact time and location. Any memories, even the tiniest detail, could be crucial. I stared at the picture, the image sparking a faint memory. A flicker of movement, a flash of light, the chilling sensation of cold metal against my skin. With trembling fingers, I used the grid to point to a specific spot on the picture, a narrow balcony shrouded in shadow. There, I typed, the single word filled with a desperate hope. Alleyway. Attacked. Mr. Davies examined the picture, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, a smile broke out on his face. Bingo, he exclaimed. You're a natural, kid. Now let's see if we can find you on that fancy security feed. A tense silence descended upon the room as Mr. Davies disappeared into a flurry of activity, conferring with Dr. Patel and Sarah, who hovered around a computer screen. Anticipation gnawed at me, a potent cocktail of hope and fear swirling within. Could this be the moment? Could this be the day the truth finally comes to light? The minutes stretched into an eternity until Mr. Davies let out a loud whoop. He pointed at the screen, a triumphant grin plastered across his face. There you are, he declared, just like you remembered. Now, let's see who decided to pay you a visit. The grainy footage flickered to life on the screen, revealing a deserted alleyway bathed in the cold glow of a street lamp. My heart hammered against my ribs as a figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by darkness. But then, as the figure stepped closer to the edge of the frame, the red beacon cast a brief, unforgiving light. In that fleeting moment, a face, etched with a chilling smirk, was revealed. A gasp escaped my lips, a strangled cry that echoed through the sterile room. It was a face I didn't recognize, but the sudden wave of recognition, the surge of anger and betrayal, was unmistakable. This was the person who had taken everything from me. Sarah, her face pale with shock, reached out and squeezed my hand. Mr. Thompson and Dr. Patel exchanged a grim look, their expressions a mix of horror and grim determination. The silence in the room was broken, not by the sterile hum of the machines, but by a collective gasp. The fight for my future, for justice, had taken a dramatic turn. We had a face, a lead, and a renewed sense of purpose. The hunt for the truth had just begun. The grainy security footage hung heavy in the air, the face of my attacker, a chilling reminder etched onto the screen. Relief, laced with a bitter taste of vengeance, coursed through me. We finally had a lead, a target for the frustration and anger that had festered within me for weeks. Dr. Patel, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a steely resolve, turned to me. "Do you recognize this person?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. With the grid, I tapped out a simple, stark answer. "No." Disappointment flickered across Mr. Thompson's face. "But you're sure it was them?" he questioned, his gaze fixed on the screen. I blinked once, confirming my certainty. The memory of the attack, though fragmented, was crystal clear on that point. "All right," Mr. Thompson said, his voice heartening. "Then we find out who they are." He launched into a flurry of activity, contacting his investigator network, scouting public records. The sterile room buzzed with renewed energy, a stark contrast to the days of frustrating dead ends. Days turned into a tense waiting game. Mr. Davies, a constant presence with his rumpled coat and sharp eyes, kept me updated on the progress, or lack thereof. The lead, it turned out, was colder than initially hoped for. The attacker, captured briefly in the fleeting light of the red beacon, remained a ghost, an anonymous face in a crowded city. One afternoon, Sarah arrived, her usual sunny disposition clouded with worry. "Mr. Thompson hit a wall," she sighed, her voice heavy with disappointment. "There's no trace of this person anywhere. No criminal record, no identification." Frustration bubbled within me. Was this all for nothing? Would the face on the screen forever remain a nameless phantom? I typed on the grid, expressing my mounting despair. "Dead end. No justice." Sarah read the message on the screen, her eyes welling up with tears. "No," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor. "We won't let it be a dead end. We'll find another way." Her unwavering support, along with the steely determination in Mr. Thompson's eyes and the quiet focus on Dr. Patel's face, rekindled a spark of hope within me. Maybe a name wouldn't come easy, but giving up wasn't an option. Then Mr. Davies, who'd been staring intently at the screen, spoke up. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice laced with a hint of excitement. "Look at the attacker's clothes." He zoomed in on the footage, focusing on the details of the clothing. It wasn't much. A worn leather jacket, faded jeans. But then a glint of recognition flickered in Mr. Davies' eyes. "That jacket," he muttered, his brow furrowed in thought. "I've seen it before, somewhere." He rummaged through his bag, pulling out a crumpled photograph. The picture depicted a group of young men, their faces etched with a cocky bravado. In the corner, almost obscured by another figure, stood a young man with a familiar-looking leather jacket. "This was taken a few months ago," Mr. Davies explained, pointing to the young man in the corner. "I was investigating a petty theft case at a local bar. This guy, his name is Tommy, was part of a loose gang known for causing trouble." A surge of adrenaline shot through me. Was this it? Could this blurry figure in a group photo be the answer we were looking for? With trembling fingers, I typed on the grid, "Investigate Tommy, the one in corner." Mr. Davies grinned, a hint of satisfaction glinting in his eyes. "That's the plan, kid. We're going to dig up everything we can on Tommy and his little gang. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe someone remembers something." The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with potential dead ends and unexpected turns. But in that moment, with a face, a name, and a renewed sense of purpose, the silence in the room felt charged, not with despair, but with a quiet determination. The fight for justice, for a voice for my future, had entered a new phase. And this time, we were armed not only with hope, but with a name, Tommy. A name that might just be the key to unraveling the truth.